first thing I did was go over to the dispensary and get her some gummies and sat her down and said, Mom, this is marijuana. I want you to understand that. It has CBN, and that's going to help you sleep through the night. And it has CBD, and that's going to help you with your inflammation and your pain. And it does have THC. It's going to make you feel a little bit spacey, but it will help the other compounds work better. So she took about a half a gummy, and she did that every night for about 3 nights. On the third night, I heard her moving around the house. I thought that was strange because she had to use a walker at the time. And I went downstairs. She was in the kitchen with no walker, trying to find the cookies. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're up and out of bed and you're on your feet. Let me get those cookies for you. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Books and Backbone podcast. My name's Donna Harris. I'm the owner of Bookkeeping Made Simple outside of Salt Lake City, Utah. And with me today is Loren DeFalco. Loren, tell us a little bit about what you do and your business.
Sure. Thanks, Donna, for having me today. I'm a partner, co-founder at CB1 Capital, cannabinoid-focused hedge fund and advisory group. And I think we've been at this for close to 10 years now. I've spent the last 25 years in finance in various roles, mostly wealth management and RIA for a number of years. So heavy focus on finance, but my entree into the cannabis and cannabinoid world started probably 15 years ago, and for the last 10 years, or close to 10 years, we've had this entity running.
Awesome. So what brought you into the cannabis world?
Well, unfortunately, it was a nasty accident I had with a seizure coming back from, at the time, I was working at HSBC, and I was coming back from a training session, I believe, early on, and I was at LaGuardia Airport, New York, and woke up in an ambulance and found out I had a massive seizure. I was put on a host of medications to deal with that, which were just not working too well. It was a cognitive decline, I guess I'd say is the best way to think about that. And I knew it wasn't a good long-term solution, so I ended up finding all this information about cannabinoids and CBD and how other companies outside of the US were working with that to treat seizures. And I ended up adopting that as well as a completely different regimen of food that complemented it to target the endocannabinoid system. And that alleviated my symptoms, and I was able to get off of all my medication. And then that was about 15 years ago, I think, roughly, about 2009.
That's awesome. I have a niece that has some seizures, and that's been the only thing that's helped her.
Yes, it's tremendous when you understand and for the right seizure indication, because there's many seizure indications that are some that are genetic and there's some that are brought on through what they would call dysregulation of the endocannabinoid system, which is a big contributing factor. So depending on where it really comes from, the pathology, it's difficult to know for everyone if that will work, but at least for some of the symptoms, it does a good job.
Right. I like that you pointed that out. It's not one size fits all. And a lot of times when I go to the doctor, I feel like they see me as a list of symptoms.
Yes, I've been
And
there.
like they're really good drug dealers.
Yes,
And it's not to
unfortunately.
bash on doctors. The doctors do some wonderful things, but a lot of
Well,
times I
it's like
just
a
feel like
it's like
they throw a
accountant.
pill at it.
Yes, but it's like accountants or attorneys. You
hmm
have to find a good one. You know,
hmm
they're not all the same, and some are very good. I was fortunate enough to have a neurologist who really understood what I was dealing with and worked with me. There were other doctors who were not willing to do that. So it's really finding the right people.
It really is. It really is. There are people, and you mentioned accountants like me and attorneys as well, that kind of lean on their degree, I feel like. Oh, you should trust me because I have a degree. And I'm like, I can go do the same research. So the degree is not a magic bullet. It helps, but it's not a magic bullet.
It's a good baseline, but I think for most people, it's post their degree that most of the knowledge comes from, and 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 not everybody goes through the same experiences. Not everyone has the same mentors, and that's in every walk of life. But since you're an accountant, it resonated to say accountant.
Yeah, and I point out to people a lot of times I tried to do college young, but I was having children at the
Mhm.
time. So it just wasn't possible for me at the time. I returned to college at the age of 50
Great.
and finished my bachelor's and 2 master's degrees. It was a different experience than it would have been when I was 20,
I
because I
would
went
think
in
so.
already working in my field, knowing what I needed to know and knowing that I didn't know everything I needed to know.
Excellent.
So, so I really was kind of going in as I'm already an accountant. Now let's get some letters behind my name so everyone else knows that too.
Yes, it's a good idea.
So, what issues have you seen in the cannabis and blah blah? I can English. Cannabis and cannabis adjacent industries right now,
Oh, I think the
especially with the farm bill.
yeah, it was the Farm Bill in 2018 that opened up what the most people refer to as the hemp loophole
Hmm.
for the intoxicating THC related products. And as of I think a week ago, in the appropriations bill to reopen the government, there was a basic blanket ban across all intoxicating cannabinoids that will take effect over a 90-day period for synthetics and a
Hmm.
1 year period for natural, seemingly to give time for possible new regulation for some of the non-synthetic cannabinoids is the rationale for the 1 year delay. But that's a really big deal. That industry is hard to know the size of because there's no central reporting the way
Right.
there is with states like Florida or Illinois with cannabis.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of assumptions being made, but the estimates range from 25 to 35 billion in terms of the revenue that the hemp-derived cannabinoid world has grown to. So it's a very large employer. There's a lot of folks in the regulated cannabis world who feel that it was an unfair advantage because the regulated folks are paying a much higher tax, have a much higher regulatory burden. So it caused a schism within the industry in a sense. And now over the last week, it's become more or moving to a more unified front to reschedule the plant, regardless of what you call it. Some people say it's akin to talking about potato derived alcohol versus corn derived alcohol. What's the difference?
Hmm.
And I think that makes a lot of sense because at the end of the day, it's THC that it is that they're trying to, regulate. And that's where some of the issues come in with non-age gating and a lack of regulation. So that's a big, big issue. And of course, the rescheduling or perceived actions to reschedule in the coming weeks or months, depending on who you speak with, for cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. And that would eliminate the onerous 280E tax burden,
Oh yeah.
which is a tax on gross profit versus, a tax
Versus net
on.
profit, like everybody else.
Right.
Yeah.
So 70% effective tax rates. Some are higher depending on the situation. So that would really help to spur investment back into the industry, which has been just completely ignored for the last couple of years by the investing community at large because there's no certainty on
Right.
anything. So
The
the
market doesn't
certainty.
like volatility like that.
Yeah, yeah, they don't like volatility and uncertainty is a
Right.
big one. And so at least if you understand the rules of the game, you can play. But this has dragged on for close to 5 years now, where we thought we would have concrete federal regulatory reform, and it's just been dragging on. And President Trump acknowledged this, I think, in August, where they were
Hmm.
still working on the rescheduling that President Biden had started in the last administration, and they've messaged that they're going to be addressing this soon. And some folks tend to think that by closing the hemp loophole, as they call it, that it opens the door for rescheduling. That remains to be seen. But yeah, that's where the optimism lies.
Yeah. I was really surprised that they did that, um, because and I this is just as off of what I've observed. I haven't read any studies. I haven't gotten any firsthand data on it, but it seems like most Americans are not in favor of a lot of regulation of THC products, other than keep them out of the hands of children and make sure that we know what's in it. It seems like most Americans are starting to see that it can be very beneficial. It's not deadly like alcohol is, but we promote alcohol.
Hmm.
It's a soft spot. I have friends that are dying of alcoholism, and
Yeah,
so
alcohol is a much harder substance, in my opinion.
oh,
Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah, the numbers are 90% of the US, I believe, are in favor of medical cannabis, as they call it.
Hmm.
The adult use, I think, comes in around 60%. So, yeah, the majority of folks are in favor. And to your point, the biggest concern is age gating.
Yep.
But there's also the safety side of it in terms of testing, making sure it's going through maybe GMP versus not GMP. And the regulated industry doesn't really have GMP either, even though a lot of states have adopted rules that are akin to GMP. It's not, like a pharmaceutical company where it has to be. So, I think people want safety, people want reliability, and to keep it out of the hands of children.
Yeah.
And most people don't want synthetics. Although there's synthetics, there's semi-synthetics, as we call CBD, that is, transformed into THC in a lab. So there's different kinds of synthetics. There's different kinds of impurities depending on the processes, and some people there's good actors
Oh,
that do the best
and
they
there's ones
can.
that aren't so much.
Right, and then there's these cartels, the Chinese cartels and the Mexican cartels that have infiltrated the system, and there's no one kind of overseeing that, and I think that's what brought on a lot of this was the concern that this was being exploited. Depends who you speak to. Everyone has a little bit of a different view, but yeah, I agree with you that most people want these products because they find benefit from them. Most people, and they don't want them in the hands of children.
And I think that's perfectly fair. We don't want them in the hands of children, even though it won't hurt them, because of they're just not old enough to make those decisions yet. Much like with alcohol or tobacco, we want that out of the hands of kids, um, unless there's a medical need for it, which is up to the parent and the doctors.
Yeah, and
Um,
there is some benefit to THC at a very low level for even
mhm.
some younger folks. But again, to your point, the doctor should be involved. And I think the other issue was just the way there's all these online websites where teenagers are basically having this stuff mailed to them. So there's absolutely it's not a good system. And there's ways to deal with that, and that's called regulation, right? And that I think is what they're going to do over the next year. I have a hard time believing that the beverages and the low dose gummies are going to be stripped away. I just think they're going to come out with a new regulatory platform for them to work through.
Yeah, I think that'd be good. I know I don't want pesticides in my products. I don't want, I don't want little kids getting into them, just like I don't any of my other medications. So yeah, I think treating it like a medicine, uh, a plant that can be medicine would be good, and then some regulation that makes sense. But what we've dealt with over the past 100 years is just outright prohibition, which I've never thought made sense.
No, not unless you had a vested interest for keeping it that way, did it make sense? And unfortunately, that's who was really driving policy is the folks who were benefiting from keeping it illegal. And then you had mass propaganda that just became commonplace in terms of the thought processes because over time, people just accept, oh, well, that's the way it is. And until we really had the internet, and that's what I believe wholeheartedly is what changed everything. It's the access to information. So once the information was easily accessible, people started to realize, oh, this isn't what I was told. But that takes time. And then it has taken time because what the internet came out in what the mid 90s or it's more accessible, I think, at least in the mid 90s. And you started to see California in 96 did the first medical program. And then you had Colorado, the first state to legalize, if I remember correctly, in early 2000s.
Colorado and Washington at about the same time. Yeah.
Yeah. And so over time, and in the last 4 years, it just accelerated. And the hemp industry really helped to accelerate the idea that this isn't what people were told because it was so prolific everywhere. You were able to access it in a lot of different places. And now people have begun to realize what they were told wasn't true.
Well,
Um,
I think it happened a little bit sooner than that. Although the internet absolutely helped. But I remember being a kid, I didn't use drugs or alcohol or tobacco or anything as a high school student. In fact, I wasn't invited to parties because everybody already knew that I didn't drink. And I remember being told the reefer madness stories, marijuana is going to make you crazy. It's going to make you violent. It's going to make you act out. And then I would see people that would smoke a joint. And it was the complete opposite of what I had been told in the DARE program. So, or that my siblings been told in the DARE program. No violence, no, unless you count what the violence done to the fridge.
Right, right.
um, Basically, all the girls I know, they're like, I kind of turned into a raccoon. I'm up in the middle of the night eating everything I can find. Um, but it didn't do what they told us that it would do, and it never has. And I think that's why it keeps popping back up, even after it was restricted in the 30s. It was still underground. People were still using it, and
Yeah.
it came back obviously in the 60s, and then they tried to restrict it, but by then everybody was like, well, but my buddy is a hippie and he uses it all the time, and I see Cheech and Chong and they don't seem violent. What are you talking about?
And that, so if you remember back to the late 70s, and I was born in 76, so I wasn't around that long, but Carter was a proponent of legalization. In 1978, there was the rhesus monkey study, which is really what a lot of, so, people started to be open minded in the 60s and the 70s, realizing that this wasn't what they were told. Then there was a rhesus monkey study where they basically pumped in so much cannabis smoke to the monkey that it was deprived of oxygen, and they would show brain damage. And that is the one study that was used for a long time to say no, it causes brain damage. And that, oh, okay. And of course, without the internet, you couldn't research anything to understand that they were just full of it, unless you got your hands on the study, which was probably a handful of people that even had access to it.
Yeah,
So the media would, bring out this story of, well, see, it causes brain damage. We have data. That data was absolute garbage. We know now, but they were close to doing, a reversal in the late 70s. And then Reagan came in with Nancy and the, Just Say No program. And then it went the opposite way very hard. And there was a lot of the dare, the commercials we used to see as kids, your brain on drugs. I mean, it went into overdrive. And then you move fast forward to like the mid 90s, and you had Cypress Hill, and you had some other things that started to kind of bring this back to popular culture in a sense, or was moving back up. And then, of course, the AIDS epidemic, I think, helped to drive a lot of this idea that there was benefit, and people started to realize that. And then things started to, steamroll back to the way it was perhaps in the 70s when people were more open minded. But yeah, from 1980 to till the early 1994, I think there was a ton of arrests still. And then you start to see it climb back up, the usage. And then, 2000s, it just really started to accelerate in terms of more and more people. And the polls are just way, way different than they were 20 years ago, even.
oh yeah, yeah. I've also noticed that Colorado reported their numbers saying that after legalization, adult use, of course, it gets in the hands of kids. Everything gets in the hands of teenagers. It's really hard to keep stuff away from a teenager. Um, if they know it's there,
Right.
they want to experience. They want to talk about it. They're exploring their independence.
Hmm.
And they noticed and were able to track that there was an initial uptick in youth use of cannabis, and then it dropped out. It was like they said, "Oh, I'm curious, and it's not really for me yet." And because it's not addictive, it doesn't stick.
Yes, the numbers for teen use we've seen at least have dropped off for sure. Not like off a cliff, but they've not gone higher.
Right.
They've gone lower. And the gating in the regulated community is very, very good. If you go into these dispensaries, you have to show an ID to even get into the store. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
liquor stores aren't like that. Convenience stores aren't like that. I remember it was much easier to always get alcohol than cannabis when you were maybe in high school or college. I don't remember what that was, but it was always easier to get alcohol. And it's definitely a more harmful substance especially over time. There's very little harm, I'll say, from cannabis unless you're somebody who's abusing it and that affects your ability to work or get up and be motivated. But that's much different than the harms that come from alcohol, where it'll lead to cirrhosis of the liver,
It
all
leads to
kinds of
organ
different.
failure across
Yeah,
the board.
yes. So there are always going to be issues. Like, the schizophrenia issue is not well understood. It doesn't cause schizophrenia, but if you are schizophrenic, it will bring it ahead. It
Yeah, it
will,
might trigger it if you
it'll
already
trigger.
are.
Yes,
Yeah.
but it's not causing it from the data that we see. So the confusion out there by people is understood because the data, there's a lot of data that just shows correlation. They don't point to the mechanism of action. That's always your tell. When they're not pointing to mechanism of action, it's correlative study after correlative study. You know they don't know why it's happening and they can't figure it out. And after all these decades, you'd think they would be able to identify the actual mechanism of action that's driving whatever these adverse events are, but they don't. They just say it's associated. It's associated, and we know from now the last decade that studies have really skyrocketed for benefits that they identify the mechanism of action easily and
Uh-huh.
all of these things. So we know how it's beneficial. We know what receptors it's binding to. We know what enzymes it may be inhibiting to cause these effects, but I don't see any data for the negative side. And part of the reason is, I believe, is to your point before about pesticides,
Hmm.
we don't know what these people in these longitudinal studies have been taking in terms of, was it a pure product? Were there other things, substances embedded in this? I mean, you would always
Or
hear
they may
about.
be taking other doctor prescribed medications that may or may not have interacted with it.
Correct. So that's why the mechanism of action is very important to understand, because that's the only way you're going to understand if it's actually leading or contributing to what they're speaking with. So I'm more optimistic than I was maybe 15, 20 years ago in terms of people understanding that. And I think we're going to hopefully see it keep progressing that way.
Yeah, I think as I've seen the conversation kind of evolve, it's gone from it's bad for you to I don't like the smell.
Yeah. Yes. And
And I'm like, well, if you don't like the smell, that's fair, but that's pretty easy to regulate. You just don't let people smoke in public.
yes, and we moved away from combustion even with cigarettes. We
Even
moved
with
away from combustion to
right.
vapes. There's derivative products like beverages and gummies that, we believe is going to be the dominant product going forward, the derivatives.
Yeah.
The flower, as they call it now, will remain, but it'll be like cigars or vinyl records where, less people use that, we believe, than beverages and, gummies. It's just most people don't like smoke.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And it's a little bit better than nicotine smoke in that
Mm.
I used to smoke years
Same
and
here.
years ago.
Oh,
For like I experimented with it for like less than a year.
that's a little
And
long.
the reason I quit was I didn't like that I always smelled like a cigarette.
Mhm.
I always tasted like an ashtray and smelled like a cigarette, and it just would cling so hard. I have not noticed that with cannabis. And
Yeah, I'm
so,
I'm not I just remember when I used to go to bars and they used to allow smoking at bars, you go home and everyone smelled like an ashtray, you know.
mhm,
And so it's different time back then. Nowadays, even with cannabis, it's much less smoke,
yeah,
I'll say, than a cigarette. Most people aren't sitting there and smoking an entire joint by themselves. Most people. So there is less smoke even there, so maybe that's part of it. Uh,
hmm,
but smoke in and of itself isn't really healthy, but it's the compounds that come with the smoke. And Dr. Donald Tishkin of UCLA had a 30-year data to support this, and you can go look him up. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he was shocked after 30 years. He's now a proponent of this, and he set out to prove there was harm coming from cannabis smoke. And I'll never forget watching the video where he said, well, what we actually found was there was a protective effect. that people who smoked they had cigarettes and cannabis, and just cannabis. And the people who were in the cigarettes and cannabis cohort had less cancer than the cigarette only smokers. And that shocked him. And then the later videos, the more recent videos, he's become a big proponent because he realized what the data was pointing to and what some of the drug development companies that we work with are working on, the anti-cancer properties of various cannabinoids. There's a protective effect on various cancer cannabinoids in regards to cancer. It gets very complicated. All cancers aren't the same.
Right.
Different cannabinoids work differently with different cancers. Sometimes you need more of an entourage effect. It depends how you're delivering these molecules. A lot of the time, oral ingestion does not get it to site. So there's a lot of complications along with using any of these products for therapeutic treatment. Why I'm optimistic that if the pharmaceutical companies did get involved, that perhaps we'd have better therapies because of their nuance and their technologies to be able to deliver the compounds to the right sites. That's a little early, but I do believe in the future we'll start to see that.
I really think so too, because I don't think there's any unringing this bell, so to speak. Um, Especially since the people that seem to be using it more are the older cohorts, the boomers and Gen X and millennials that have been around it their whole lives. And so, um,
Well, that was the video Donald Trump put out. I don't
mhm.
know if you remember a few weeks ago where a lot of people talked about it. It was about the endocannabinoid system. It was about CBD, and it talked about the cost savings if it was introduced into the medical system, and talked about seniors. And this is what the data's always shown is that there is almost as you age, for one reason or another, you tend to need these compounds to supplement your body's own endocannabinoids, or you start to elicit various inflammatory like conditions, arthritis being probably one that everyone that's a little older understands. And so that's what makes it so powerful for seniors and why they are one of the fastest growing cohorts because they have less capability to create their own endocannabinoids and need to supplement. And when they do, they just feel really good. They start to feel youthful. It's very
Yeah,
interesting when you speak to older folks in their 70s and 80s and the effects they get, and it's really good for them.
yeah. I gave some to my mom. Very very straight arrow growing up. She never drank. She never smoked. She married one man and stayed married to him. Um, but she had had a stroke. And following her stroke, it was a mild stroke as far as strokes go, but following that, she started to decline pretty quickly. And I went out to visit and help care for her for a little bit. And the first thing I did was go over to the dispensary and get her some gummies and sat her down and said, Mom, this is marijuana. I want you to understand that. And I'm using the term marijuana because that's the term she knew for it. And I said, it has CBN and that's going to help you sleep through the night. And it has CBD and that's going to help you with your inflammation and your pain. And it does have THC. It's going to make you feel a little bit spacey, but it will help the other compounds work better. So she took about a half a gummy, and she did that every night for about 3 nights. On the third night, I I heard her moving around the house. I thought that was strange because she had to use a walker at the time, or she was using a wheelchair. And I went downstairs. She was in the kitchen with no walker, trying to find the cookies.
That's great.
And I was like, oh my gosh, you're up and out of bed and you're on your feet. Let me get those cookies for you. Uh,
That's
so
a great story.
she had, she still passed away at the end of July this year, but she had a much better transition. Um, she wasn't in as much pain, and it helped for a long time. That, and I had to do the same thing with my dad. He didn't want to take them himself, but he was very worried about her being addicted to them. So I sat him down and said, this is what I'm giving her. This is what it does. Here are the studies, because he's a scientist.
Hmm.
Um, And he was like, okay, as long as it's not addictive, I'm okay with that. So we were able to give her a little bit better quality of life at the end of her life.
That's
And
great.
I thought, given that he's an entomologist, so his background is in chemistry and biology. And when I was able to sit down and go, this is the molecule, this is how it works, this is why I'm using this, I think that really helped. That it was just factual.
Yes, facts do help for sure. And that's another person who my mother and my father, same boat. They believed the information they were given. Why wouldn't they? Why would people lie to me who I look up to? Why would people who we vote for lie to us? And a lot of them didn't even know.
Right,
It's kind of took a life of its own over the decades. So I totally understand why people are reticent. I totally understand why people think certain ways. Because
right,
if I hadn't gotten sick the way I had gotten sick, I don't know if I would have figured out what I figured out.
right. Yeah. So are they still having problems getting banked? What are the challenges that they're having on the financial side in that industry?
The regulated cannabis companies have a very difficult time with banking. There are people who go for mortgages that they won't get approved because they're associated with cannabis companies. We know many people who that's the case. We know people who've gotten to bank personally. The hemp side is now about to experience that issue because they were allowed to bank with all these large banks. And we know, and I know from a call I was on yesterday, that that's a big concern that now they're going to be debanked. And there was, this was talked about with the Trump administration over the last couple of years in terms of debanking and crypto and all these other guns and in different places that are completely legal and they were being debanked. And cannabis, is another one. So, yes, that's part of why they've been pushing for the Safe Banking Act, is the thought that that act will help to alleviate those issues. There's other bills that they've thought perhaps could deal with that as well, but yes, that's another burden for the industry being a Schedule One drug. The banks just don't want to take the risks. Now there are certain banks, there's credit unions that are willing to take the risk, but like I said, the mortgages are still a big problem. Smaller companies that try and enter have a much more difficult time with banking relationships than the larger ones,
Oh,
for
that makes
sure.
sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
the larger ones have more money and money talks.
Usually that's the case. Yes, unfortunately. So yeah, we're hopeful that we can get Schedule 3, and that will help to open up some minds, perhaps, but also open up some of the other issues like banking and even listing on a national exchange versus being a lot of these public companies are stuck on the OTC or up in Canada on the CSE that are really not the exchanges you want to be listed on. I don't recall ever seeing companies with 1 billion in revenue listed on these exchanges. Typically, these are early stage companies, most of the time without revenue. Um, a lot of mining companies, a lot of mining explorers up in Canada, typically list on these junior exchanges. Certain money platforms that you trade on. And I know with my old RIA, I couldn't buy IIPR. This was like over 10 years ago when I had it. They wouldn't let me buy it. I said, but it's New York Stock Exchange listed. They said you can't trade that. So there's even depending on who you are, depending on your platforms are, there's limitations. If it's even if it is New York Stock Exchange listed, but at least with most money managers, they'll be able to access these stocks if they're NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange listed. And that's what we want. The Canadian operators, and this is the really bizarre thing, the Canadian operators up north, most of who we're very friendly with, they are listed on US exchanges like New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ because it's legal up in Canada. Our operators that are working through the state regulated programs are listed on the CSE up in Canada, which is the junior exchange, can't list on the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ down here. So we've been trying to get that message to the folks in the administration that make decisions, pointing out the idea that the Canadians are listed on our exchanges and we're listed on theirs. And they're
Yeah.
listed on the better exchanges. And that's a problem.
Yeah, I would think that they would want to put U.S. citizens at the forefront instead of foreigners.
You'd hope.
You know, not anything against the Canadians, but I would think that they would say Americans. If the Canadians can be on there, surely the Americans should be able to be on a stock exchange in our own country.
And it's not a law either. This is really a compliance issue at the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange. You know, we know many people have had conversations. There is no specific law that forbids it. It's a comfort level at the exchange if they want to start listing these names. And we're hopeful that a Schedule 3 will change that. It might require some type of legislation or administrative guidance, maybe an executive order or something in that nature. But yeah, that we think is the final piece to unlock the opportunity for investors that see what this is, understand that there's gigantic potential in this industry. I mean, just looking at the numbers from alcohol as they keep going off, I don't ever recall seeing a demographic outlook, and I've talked about this for years. When you start to realize that the younger folks, the Gen Z or whatever they call them now, are not drinking really. I remember, my town I grew up in, Huntington on Long Island. We were, I'm pretty sure, in the Guinness Book at one point for the most bars in a square mile. It was and I know over the last year, talking to a bunch of folks that different bars are closing down, and they keep saying the younger people aren't coming the way you guys
And they're
used
not
to.
and they're not going to
So
bars to drink when they do drink. They tend to drink at home.
right,
If they're
and
going to
so
drink
they're
at home,
using cannabis as a substitute. And so
there's
when you think about that demographic outlook and from an investment thesis, that you have this shift from people using alcohol moving into more people using cannabis, there's a great opportunity from that perspective as an investor to, share in that, but you're kind of not able to participate. I mean, there's one stock that trades on Robinhood that's a cannabis security. And that just happened in the last couple of weeks, a U.S.
oh,
operator.
okay.
So they are listed, and I'll say we have a position in this company. I have to say that ahead of time. It's Glass House. It's a California operator. I'm not recommending that name to anyone, but we know they're able to trade on Robinhood as of a few weeks ago. As you look at that opportunity from an investor thesis, I just can't think of anything else that has an embedded growth rate based on time, with the older people dying out, unfortunately, and the younger people moving ahead into a more lucrative position to be able to access their capital. I guess is one way to think of it. They're bigger spenders in the 30s than they are in their 20s, as they're earning more. So as that shift happens, we expect there to be even more revenue going into this industry, and that's why we want to make sure that other people have access to this opportunity.
Right. So, what is it that scares off the banks and the stock exchanges? Is it mostly the regulatory risk, or is it
There's regulatory risks.
needed to exist?
There's issues with Schedule 1 drugs.
Right.
First off, like an alcohol company, if you have an alcohol license, you can't sell Schedule 1 drugs. You lose your alcohol license. So that's a big part of it. There's also just reputational issues. People are afraid that they're going to be perceived as, helping drugs, or there's misconceptions out there. But yes, there's regulations, there's laws, there's issues around Schedule 1 that make it very difficult for people to take the risk. I mean, we work with a company that specifically is a layer of compliance that allows these companies to bank at regular banks. So the middleman, almost, that they have the entire compliance package for cannabis related companies, and the bank will adopt that compliance package, and they'll be able to deposit. Operators will be able to deposit through that liaison into credit unions or banks that are comfortable with that compliance layer. But it's not too well known. There's thousands of banks that don't have this. It's a very small portion that have opted to enter this arrangement.
Okay. It kind of goes into my, gee, that seems kind of silly thing. If they were citing regulatory or political risk, I would understand a lot more, but it sounds like it's more, well, we don't like it because
Some,
it's Schedule 1.
there's legal risks with a Schedule 1 drug. There's regulatory risks, but they're not all the same for everyone. They're
Right.
not. So it's a patchwork. It depends on who you are, depends on what your internal regulatory issues are.
It
You know,
depends on
when
how
we
diverse you are.
yeah, and when we tried launching this almost 10 years ago, it was very difficult to find a prime broker. And we found one, but it wasn't easy.
Right.
And then you have custodians that, Pershing being one of the largest ones. Pershing bailed out of custody of these assets back in 2019, I think it was. And they said, no, can't custody these assets with us anymore. Can't have plant touching. And so then we all had to find a new custodian. And it was like, so it's this game going on in the industry, the finance side of it, where, some banks all of a sudden become open to it. And then there's like, no. And then, oh, we're back. And it's a hodgepodge of reasons as to.
That's interesting. That Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't know that. I do know that I have colleagues, junior bookkeepers, that have refused to work with cannabis clients. And that was why I wanted to move into the space, was because I was like, well, if these junior bookkeepers that don't know anything are refusing, um, how are CPAs and accountants faring? And how's the business doing with those professionals that they need? And I found that it was an underserved market, that accountants themselves are saying it's too much risk.
Yes, we've heard that from certain accountants that they won't deal with this. Insurance is an issue as well. Just our E&O and D&O was not easy to obtain. We found a good carrier, but it wasn't easy. Even life insurance, I had back in a prior life dealt with a lot of that. And only certain carriers, only one or two carriers right now are able to underwrite a life insurance policy if you're a cannabis operator. So, there's all these different pockets that there's opportunity because it hasn't fully come in yet, and that's where we're kind of setting up ourselves because there's not many funds out there. There's not many advisory groups out there that are willing to work with cannabis companies. Same thing with accounting, same thing with insurance, and that presents an opportunity. But in the short term, it's a bit of a pain for a lot of the operators.
Right, right. Yeah, well, I understand. I understand that it's a pain.
Yeah.
And I am absolutely willing to take on any client that's willing to pay my fees. So, and I don't raise prices simply because it's a cannabis company. I want to see that it's run well, but I don't raise prices because I don't perceive the same risk that I think others do. So
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with what the risks would be on the accounting side.
it's largely reputational. I think that they're
Okay.
afraid that there will be a perception that maybe they themselves consume and that people will view them as less professional. And my immediate take on that is, if you're worried about what I do in my spare time, you're not my client.
Yes, I think
So
there's this
it's not
perception.
something you should be even concerned about.
There's a perception out there that if you use cannabis, well, you must be using it all day long,
Right.
right? Which is like, okay, I understand there's people who use alcohol all day long, and there are people who use cannabis all day long, but typically you kind of notice if that's the case. And
Hmm.
most of those people, unfortunately, if you're using cannabis all day long, a lot of the time it's because you have an ailment that you need it. Then there are other people who actually just abuse it, just like they abuse other things.
Right.
So, but it's bless you, but it's a misperception, of course, that people that everyone who uses it all day long. For me, myself, right before I go to sleep, it's the best thing for sleep.
Oh, I
It
agree.
really works
Yeah.
fantastic. And I took Ambien years ago, and holy, that was horrible. I sleep well, I wake up rested. It works for me in that way.
And no hangovers like there is with alcohol. Alcohol will mess with my sleep so bad. Um, Cannabis does not. It just puts me to sleep and I'm down.
Yeah,
Really
works.
good. And Ambien, oh my goodness, Ambien. I have taken Ambien at night and I've had to start telling my husband, I'm taking an Ambien. Don't let me get out of bed. Because I've gotten up the next morning and realized I sent reels to people. I don't remember what I did. I That's dangerous.
Yes, a lot of nasty side effects. People eating food, driving cars, doing things they shouldn't be doing, and not
The driving
realizing.
cars really, I have
Yes.
him hide the keys if I'm going to take Ambien that night.
Yes.
I tell him ahead of time, I'm taking it, hide the keys, make sure you're keeping an eye, because he doesn't sleep much. He's a former trader himself, so he would trade 20, 21 hours a day. He's used to running on a few hours of sleep. So when I wake up, it wakes him up. And I was like, don't let me go anywhere. Send me back to bed. Don't let me eat anything. Don't let me mess with my phone.
It's
So,
dangerous. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And part of the issue, I think, or what we think is a big opportunity, but also an issue is these cannabinoids, as we mentioned before about drug development.
Hmm.
GW Pharmaceuticals is the one name I think most people know that was successful with a cannabinoid. It was a CBD, it was pretty much CBD, almost purified, for children's epilepsy.
Uh-huh.
Now, the issues for that are patents because it's a natural substance. You have to get unique patents, which GW has been successful. Jazz owns them now. It was taken out by Jazz, but they've had some patent litigation over the last couple of years that they were pretty successful at. So people are getting more comfortable on how these patents could work for various indications. But that at the end of the day becomes one of the reasons why there hasn't been a lot of drug development, because these are natural compounds and you don't get the 20-year patent life that you would with a new chemical entity. So Pfizer had a cannabinoid program in the 90s and nothing came out of it because the analogs have really nasty adverse events. That's what they figured out. And so they couldn't really bring a drug to market because even though there would be efficacy from a compound, the adverse events were so horrible that it wouldn't get through. So they abandoned the program. I think it was in the late 90s. They had it for a number of years. Spice, which was a nasty compound that was on the streets for years ago. That's from I forget which pharmaceutical company developed it. Somebody found it in terms of the formulation and they started to sell it and it was really bad. But that was why you haven't seen a lot of work done from pharmaceutical companies. They've kind of pivoted, or they did pivot to enzyme inhibitors, and I don't want to bore you to death, but there's certain enzymes that cannibalize or catabolize cannabinoids in your body, and this is where they started to focus on. Johnson and Johnson had an enzyme inhibitor that they developed for, I forget which indication. I think it made it into a phase 2 trial, but that is where they started to look as ways to target the endocannabinoid system.
Hmm.
So there's other companies right now that are trying to go through the drug development process. And orphan indication status will give you some 7-year exclusivity. So a lot of them tend to look for orphan indications. But we're optimistic that if you have the right delivery, the right type of delivery, and you can patent that as well as maybe a combination of the indication with the compound, that should give you some good IP if you have the right attorney at least. So there's ways now that I don't think were as apparent years ago. And there's overseas there's a ton of work being done on different drug development, through the EMA and other Australia TGA. So there's a lot of work being done there. One of the companies that we're most excited about, it's a private company, but the woman who runs it's super smart, and she has a transdermal um, breast cancer for stage 0 breast cancer that
Oh,
she has clinical data on, and it hasn't entered the clinic for trials, but she has some clinical data, and there's tumor shrinkage. It's really insane, and it delivers it locally and doesn't enter the bloodstream. It doesn't get you high. So that's a unique patented delivery mechanism to bring cannabinoids to site that she's developed, and she's going to enter a phase. She's using an IND 505(b)(2) pathway, which it's dronabinol is what it is. So dronabinol was approved as a compound, I think in the 80s. It's
uh-huh.
THC basically.
It's like
So
marijuana. Okay.
yeah,
Or
so
is it?
Marinol is another one, right? So she's using that to skip the phase 1, go right into a phase 2 trial, and we're super excited about that. She also has something for hospital acquired infection using CBG and CBC, two other minor cannabinoids, combination with silver, where when they've used this in efficacy studies for the medical device that they've developed, you can't find the MRSA, you can't find the E. coli, you can't find any bacteria or fungus. It's remarkable what she's figured out, and she's got strong patents around this. And the idea is to take it to other indications beyond what she's working on with the medical device through a drug development pathway. But that's the type of stuff that starts to get exciting. Working with some of these minor cannabinoids on issues that are really problematic, like antibacterial resistance, which is just a
Yeah.
major problem. So stuff like that's exciting. There's a lot of work on pain indications that's a little more difficult, I think, personally, to get through the drug development pathway because they've kind of made it more difficult due to the opioid issues and getting pain indications approved. It's a little more subjective versus objective. And we tend to like the objective endpoints better than the subjective endpoints
I think
going
pain
through
is pretty
a trial.
subjective to start with.
Yes, I
Um,
can't take a picture and see the tumor shrink. And I don't mean to bounce around, but part of the issue with these cannabinoid drug trials is the placebo effect. There's an outsized placebo effect that most people believe is driven by the human body. So you know you're taking a substance and you'll actually start to activate it in your body. So the placebo effect is very large. Hence why we try to look for objective data that, mental health is very subjective, right? It's
yeah.
difficult. Yeah. So there's indications.
It's hard to explain that sometimes. My husband was in a really, really bad wreck back in '05 before I met him and shattered just about every bone in his body. Came back from that, but of course he's in constant pain. And so I will complain about a headache and he has to kind of bite his tongue to go, you have no idea how much pain I'm in because it's
Mm,
so subjective. His
mm,
worst pain, my worst pain is nothing on his worst pain.
right.
Um, and I acknowledge that. I have to tell him, you don't understand. I am not in pain all the time. You're in pain all the time. You have a baseline. I am never in pain. So if something hurts, I really notice it. So we talk about the subjectivity of pain, and then mental health is, how do you show depression? Everything about it is subjective. It is, could I get out of bed in the morning? And why couldn't I get out of bed? And what is normal? We don't even know what normal is, I think sometimes. It's normal to have anxiety in a lot of ways. It's what drives us to succeed.
Hmm.
But it seems like there are certain cohorts that seem to think that that's not a thing or shouldn't be a thing.
Right.
So if it's
Yeah, there's
overwhelming,
definitely
it certainly can be a problem, but some is fine.
and there's definitely benefit from cannabinoids for a lot of these indications. It's
Not
difficult to
measurable. It's hard to measure.
and it's difficult to invest in something that there's enough risk already going through drug development. You
Hmm.
add that other layer on top of it, it makes it difficult. So I'm not saying that there is an opportunity for people to get relief with these indications. It's just from an investing point of view, you try and de-risk things as much as you can before you put money into it. And there's plenty of indications that cannabinoids can help with that are objective in terms of the endpoints and what they're trying to achieve. And that's kind of where we try and focus. You can count the bacteria. It's either
Right.
there or it's not,
You
right?
can measure the size of a tumor.
Right,
It's either growing or shrinking, or it's in stasis.
right.
Yeah. So that makes it a lot easier for investors who are, they know what they're risking, um, to feel comfortable giving up their money.
Yes, it's important to de-risk any investment you do, or at least understand what the risks are. And oftentimes people don't.
Well, I think a lot of people don't understand what the risks are, or even how to mitigate some of it.
Right, right. It's not, and there's different risks across different ways of investing. There's risks that you could never even thought of. There's known risks and unknown risks.
Hmm.
I think Donald Rumsfeld used to talk about knowns and unknown knowns. I mean, he was an interesting character. But that is definitely true. There's risks you just couldn't even fathom. So at least try and mitigate the ones you can.
Yep. Yep. And there's a lot that people can do to mitigate risk. Because I think with cannabis, so much of this is perceived. Um,
Hmm.
yes, there's some regulatory things that are going on, but a lot of the risk in cannabis is a perception. People may perceive me differently because they think I use.
Hmm.
Um, and for myself, I'm like, I'm too old to care what anybody thinks. So I've had exactly one person have any sort of a negative response to me possibly using, and I do use. Um, and I kind of laughed. I was like, it's because he's a stick in the mud.
Yeah, there was a famous, or not famous, there was a good gentleman who I used to watch a lot of, who was at the University of Colorado, that talked about the biochemical issues in people who don't use cannabis and people who do. And he called it backwards looking people and forward looking people. He believed there was a biochemical reason that cannabinoids allowed you to be forward looking and to be open to the unknown, where if you did not use these compounds, if you didn't have enough endocannabinoids in your body, even, that you were backwards looking, new information you really wouldn't take in. And so he looked at it from a biochemical point of view as to why certain people are more open minded than others. He's a very smart gentleman. He passed away a number of years ago. But that was eye opening to hear something like that. And I think he really was onto something, because I believe that is true.
Yeah, I've always said alcohol turns you outwards. So you become boisterous, maybe belligerent. You're more
Hmm.
outgoing. You're more likely to walk up to the nice looking person at the end of the bar and buy them a drink.
Right.
Cannabis turns you inward, is how I phrased it to people, especially if the drug of choice is alcohol. Cannabis is a different thing.
Yeah.
You will sit there and wonder, how long has it been since I've said anything? And is it going to be weird if I respond to the comment? It seems like it was just 20 minutes ago. And it causes you to, or at least assists you in that forward thinking of, and thinking past first order consequences, maybe to second, third, fourth. So that's one of the things I really like about it, is I can solve problems better with it because I can look forward to a solution instead of backwards into, well, this was just the problem, and that problem's just the problem.
Right.
So, so what other, where would you like to see your business in the next 5 to 10 years?
Oh, I'd love to have this all played out and everything go up 10, 20, 30 fold and take a little break.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would love to see the industry, the cannabis industry at large, have moved forward. I believe there's unbelievable potential across all different types of ailments and indications that people suffer from. And I think, having dealt with so many over my life personally, it sucks when people suffer. And when you don't get the medication that actually helps, it's difficult. So I believe there's solutions from these plants, from the compounds within them. And we need to do more research to understand which ones work best for, which indications. And they've been doing a lot of that work in Israel for many years, Italy, Spain. There's been a lot of work done there, but most of it's on a handful of compounds at most. So I think when we start to get into some of the other rare type cannabinoids like CBDV or CBGA, I mean, CBGA is probably my favorite compound out of all of them.
Oh,
Yeah, there's tremendous potential with metabolic syndrome.
interesting.
Yeah, I
I've been
took it.
researching THCV for the appetite suppressant.
Yeah.
Um, and I talked to one gentleman, episode hasn't been uploaded yet, but I said, if you could figure out how to legally market that as nature's Ozempic,
Mm-hmm.
um, it has reduced my appetite. It's made it easier for me to get up and go work out. It had the effects, and this is anecdotal. The effects for me were I didn't want to eat without the nausea
Hmm.
and without because I was on tirzepatide for a few months, and I didn't see the reason for the hype. Um, but I was like, if I could do this with a more natural product that I can titrate a little bit better instead of taking this enormous heroic dose once a week, um, I would prefer that. And I know they're coming out with microdosing on the GLP-1 medications, but I really don't like. I would rather use cannabis if there's a compound that does that, and the THCV seems to be one. So I'm interested to learn more about CBGA.
And THCVA, which is one that really isn't out there, but we know some groups that are working with it, is an even higher potential for that. The acidic cannabinoids are under misunder have been under researched, I'll say, because of the
Yeah.
stability issues. We know a couple groups that have stabilized them, have patents on it, and now they're starting to do a lot more work on it. But CBGA is one of those acidic compounds that, if you leave it out for too long a time, put it in, too hot of an area, it'll degrade to CBG, which
Mm-hmm.
has a different, it's a different structure, different therapeutic properties. CBGA, we know, has interplay with the PPAR receptors, my cholesterol, and I have this note up here that I've had for a while, but I used it for a year and a half, and I eat bacon and eggs cooked in butter every morning. I'll have cheeseburgers probably every other night, sausages, all the stuff that they say probably isn't that good for you. My LDL went from 150 to 66. My triglycerides went from 95 to 53, and my HDL stayed flat at 62. I got this over the summer, these results, and I was blown away because somebody told me that that was their experience. And so I was like, okay, let me see. And it gives you an energy. It's very strange, CBGA. You
Yeah.
get energy from it, which is not what most people think cannabinoids do, but they all think THC, they're all the same. They're all very different.
Mm-hmm.
And CBGA gives you energy. Now, you have to get it from the right source. You have to make sure it hasn't degraded. There's a lot of issues, and why we're optimistic now that some groups have stabilized these, that you'll start to see more of it sold at the retail level because they're tremendous compounds. The problem has been stability. So now that I think that they fixed that, I hope to see some of these like CBGV. There's a whole host of these acidic cannabinoids that are much stronger therapeutic potential. CBDA is close to 100 times the potency of CBD.
Mm-hmm.
So the payload's lower, it's way more potent, and there's definitely less psychoactivity. I mean, CBD has psychoactivity. It's not euphoric, but there's psychoactivity. And this is another thing. Like, there's psychoactive compounds, there's euphoric compounds. It's like it gets very confusing. But the acidic cannabinoids, I think that's the real potential for therapeutic applications more than anything.
Well, I know that there's a ton of cannabinoids that we haven't even scratched the surface on. So I'm excited to hear about the research on that.
Yeah, and it's starting to grow. Like, there's more and more data that I see every day, which is encouraging. But once we unlock Schedule 3, I think you start to see more, way more research because, to your point about perception, even though some of these are non-euphoric, it's still from the cannabis plan. The cannabis is Schedule 1, and it gets weird. So I think when it's destigmatized through rescheduling, you're going to have more and more of these universities working on these compounds to understand what they do. And that, at the end of the day, is really what drives drug development. It's the research that's done, sometimes within different companies, but oftentimes through university research, and they'll take that research and bring it into the preclinical program and develop it and hopefully get it into the clinic to prove efficacy. But yeah, it all starts there from that research level, and we think Schedule 3 makes that much more prevalent.
I love that the universities are thinking about doing research on it because my understanding was the only one that was the University of Mississippi, and they're allowed to grow basically ditchweed.
Yeah, they
Research on it. It was the Israelis that did a lot of the groundbreaking research that we're relying on now.
Yes, Techion, and there's a gentleman, Dr. Didi Mary, who is one of the smartest fellows. He's been doing a ton of that work over there. There's others, Meshulam, who passed away, and others, but Didi Mary is probably the smartest one I've come across at Techion in Israel. There was 6 or 7 DEA licenses handed out 3 or 4 years ago. Dr. Sue Sisley out in the University of Arizona got one of them. There's a handful of others. We know of some of the work that they've been doing. One of the groups has 4 different clinical trials going on using cannabinoids because these licenses, as you said, University of Mississippi had the only one. And then a
For a
friend
long
of ours, Shane Pennington, who's an attorney, he was actually one of the ones at the ALJ hearing last year. He did a lot of work with one of the folks he worked with, Matt Zorn at the time, to get these licenses issued. So there were 6 or 7 of them issued to these groups. They weren't at the university level, but they were people who wanted to do the research and the work and import cannabis to be able to work on it. Because unfortunately, you couldn't source it in the U.S. to work on it; you have to import it. University of Mississippi, I don't remember where they were sourcing it from, but when these folks got the DEA licenses, they were importing it to be able to do the research. We think that's just scratching the surface in Italy, Spain, and Australia, and a whole bunch of other countries, Israel being the biggest one, they've been doing this work. So we're a little bit behind the ball in terms of where we should be in the U.S. and understanding the properties of these compounds.
Well, where can people reach you if they are interested in your services?
I'm on LinkedIn. That's the best way to find me.
Okay.
Loren Loren DeFalco, DEFALCO. I look a little younger in the picture. Perhaps it's something I have to update. But yeah, and then our website is cb1cap.com. We try and put some information on there, but yeah, I think if anyone actually wants to have a conversation, it's just send me a message on LinkedIn.
Okay.
I'm more than happy to have the conversations.
Well, we'll put that in the show notes so that people can find you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Donna. It's been a pleasure.
You too. Thank you.
Okay, bye bye.